Hello and welcome to This Week in Review with Nigel Farage. Nigel, we're recording this on Tuesday, which makes it a bit more risky than usual. Are you expecting anything to happen this week?
Well, I think interest rates going up for the 13th time is fairly predictable. The exact amount we'll see. We've also got other economic figures like inflation coming out. And interesting, it's almost like Back to the Future. I feel I'm doing A-level economics again in 1980 because the debate's the same. It's about inflation. It's about, is it wage growth that pushes it? Is it external shock? Of course, in those days, we had the Afghanistan war, etc., going on. These are all the same old debates. Zero recognition from the Bank of England of the phenomenon of monetary inflation. Zero recognition that quantitative easing, etc., and massive increases in money supply might even be vaguely contributory, which I find extraordinary. And the monetarists, they're back. We thought they were extinct. They're back. Roger Bootle, the veteran, saying, we must put up by 0.5%. We've got to dampen down the economy. And that, of course, is a classic theory that you put rates up to dampen down the economy. Others saying, no, that would be too brutal. Now, there is, of course, a mortgage crisis coming, and that's because, anybody under 40 can't even remember interest rates over 1%. They're below where we're going to now. So some huge shocks for those people. But, and we chatted about this before coming on air, when we launched Fortune and Freedom, we said one of the big problems was that savers got no returns. Well, now there are some pretty good deals out there. You tie your money up for a year or 2 years with building societies, etc. There are some quite good rates being offered. So I actually think that we're re-entering a period of normality. I think the aberration has been the last few years. And have zero interest rates, has it boosted the economy? Has it made us richer? No, it's been a disaster. None of it's actually worked at all. So pain for borrowers, better days for savers. Inflation clearly much stickier than the bank thought, or they never get anything right. But interestingly, on the other side, we have the eurozone sinking into, it's not depression, but it's looking pretty pessimistic in parts of the eurozone, and deflation in China. So interesting couple of battles going on here between the deflationary impact of what China's up to, what Europe's up to, and the inflationary side of where we and perhaps to some extent the Americans are. So really huge economic battle going on right at this moment in time.
A few months ago, in January, I think it was, we were talking about the UK being predicted to be the slowest major economy. The UK might be going into recession while the rest of the world does well. Now it's sort of the opposite, where the UK is still doing okay and the Eurozone's in recession, but everyone's worried about the inflation numbers instead. And what I'd like you to do is untangle that issue, because it's a trade-off, right, between economic growth and inflation. Yes. And, it's a glass half full or glass half empty, depending on your Brexit persuasion sort of story.
One of the reasons that we have inflation is, a relatively full employment situation, labour shortages in some sectors. We'll ignore for the minute the 4 million that refuse to work. But so we have labour shortages. That obviously is pushing prices up. Despite the sheer uselessness of our government, there are still some quite good things happening within the UK economy. We've seen a couple of, major global relocations here that have happened in the last couple of weeks. Things are much, much worse in Europe than they are here. Not that you'd ever know that listening to the BBC or Alistair Campbell or anybody else. Europe have got, we are not taking advantage, and I've talked about that on this podcast before, but still, there is still entrepreneurial flair out there within the UK economy, and that's why rates need to keep going up, whereas in the Eurozone, they probably don't need to. So, yeah, as you say, there are some good signs in the UK economy, even if we're disappointed by the sheer hopelessness of our government.
Let's dig into the idea of this monetary policy being it's almost a transfer of wealth, either from borrowers to savers or from savers to borrowers, because both are impacted by interest rates. And what we had for a long time was low interest rates, which was very good for borrowers, bad for savers. Now we've got higher interest rates, which is very bad for mortgage borrowers and other types of borrowers, including corporates, but it's good for savers and investors. What I'm interested in, though, is almost the politics of this, because mortgage borrowers are being asked to bear the burden of having to slow the economy And that doesn't seem to be, I mean, doesn't that create a political divide or an economic divide, which I'm guessing is going to have some sort of ramifications at some point?
I mean, interestingly, it does, because don't forget, we've had the government help to buy schemes. Well, how many of those people are now debt trapped? I mean, no one's even talked about this. No one's even mentioned this. We've had years and years of help to buy. People buying properties, new builds, often, by the way, substandard new builds, what they've had all sorts of problems with. They're now debt trapped. And the fact that we had no warnings from the bank or the government that we were going into a rising interest rate environment, because none of them saw the need, this will put yet more blame on the government. And Labour coming up with a narrative, this is all because of Liz Truss. It's the Truss tax on your mortgage. That's complete baloney. But politically, it's yet more bad news for the Conservatives. And what with that and the civil war we've seen for the last couple of weeks between Sunak and Johnson, I promise you there is no way back for these people. Absolutely no way back for these people. And Labour now beginning to unravel, yet more policy. Big speech in Edinburgh yesterday by Keir Starmer. It's going to be wind farms everywhere. No more new investment in oil and gas. Continuation of green taxes. I mean, Richard Littlejohn in today's Daily Mail is always very entertaining and amusing. He said, if you think this lot are bad, wait for the next lot. I think that's kind of where we are. Yet, back to the earlier point, despite that, there are still things happening out there. There are still entrepreneurs. Business goes on, despite government, not because of it.
And it's always comparative, isn't it? Because, business is happening somewhere. It's a question of who's got the best policies. Let's move on to, it'll be almost a Friday funny by the time people watch this. The French President Macron and Italy's Meloni are meeting. I'd love to be on a fly on the wall of this one. What do you think they're going to talk about?
Well, Macron's all over the place, isn't he? Absolutely all over the place on China, all over the place on Russia. And Meloni, I mean, some people say, oh, she's gone soft. Some people say she's gone soft in office. But actually, you know what? She's brought stability to the job. There's very rarely any criticism of her and the way she's behaving. And she's shifted the center of gravity in Italy from the center left, much more towards the center, or even marginally towards the center right. So she's doing very, very well. They, of course, will have huge disagreements on just about everything. And I've no doubt there'll be a brave face put on publicly. But the really big one is Poland, and the Polish president and prime minister now talking about a referendum on whether they should accept EU quotas for migrants crossing the Mediterranean. I mean, that almost becomes an in-out referendum. Not quite, but almost becomes an in-out referendum for Poland. So all those problems that we've talked about over the last few years, they haven't gone away.
Yeah, one of the key issues that Meloni and Macron are supposedly going to talk about is lots of bilateral issues and trying to get things done rather than going via Europe and the EU, doing things separately. Isn't this proving the point that you've been making for a very long time now?
Well, it doesn't work. I mean, look at the vaccine policy. When they saw what the Brits were doing, any idea that the European Commission should run vaccine policy was for the birds, and they all did their own blooming thing. The authority of Brussels, and particularly under the command of Ursula von der Leyen, who was completely useless. I mean, Juncker before him may have been drunk after lunch every day, but at least he had some idea of politics. This woman's got none of that. So, problems mounting in the eurozone, recession, which they're in with no prospect of getting out of it. And who knows? Maybe the inflationary UK has escaped recession. Maybe.
Who would have thought that Brexit would have caused a recession in the eurozone before the UK? Thanks very much, Nigel, for joining us, and everyone home. Thanks for watching.